Welcome, everyone, to our Mobilizing South Asians for Reproductive Justice breakout session. We're very excited to have you. If you're just joining us, feel free to come in and take a seat. We'll get started in just a moment. Great. Well, thank you again for joining us for Indian American Impact's National Summit. My name is Sarah. I am our Deputy Organizing Director and Pennsylvania and New Jersey State Director for IA Impact. And I'll turn it over to Devanshi to introduce herself.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Devanshi, and I'm a Development Fellow at Indian American Impact right now.
Thank you. So we will be your staff and fellow team here in the back supporting this session. We're very, very excited to have all of you here to be here for this incredibly important breakout session. So as you all know, abortion rights and reproductive justice are critically important issues. We're incredibly grateful to South Asian SOAR, to Dr. Swetha Naroji, and this session. We want to thank our sponsors, NARAL and Planned Parenthood as well. We know that you all have a great session in store for you all. I did also want to mention, so IA Impact has a WhatsApp tip line as part of our misinformation program. So as we know, a lot of you may have seen mis or disinformation about abortion floating around online. And so we want to invite you, if you do see in the future or hear any kind of information about abortion, about reproductive health, on this topic, on any other topic, you can actually send a message to our WhatsApp tip line. And if you want to actually take out your phones, and I will give you the number for our tip line. So if you save it as 202 240 8742, that's 202 240 8742. That is the direct line for our WhatsApp tip line. And so you can actually send tips there. You can send, if you see articles, if you see something that someone posted on WhatsApp, you can send it directly to our tip line. We're actively monitoring misinfo trends. We have a fact-checking service that we can use to monitor these tips that you all send in. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters, and we'll have them share a little bit more about their session, introduce themselves, and get our breakout started. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the IA Impact team for having us, and to all of you for joining us today. Before we do the fun stuff of introducing ourselves and getting into the agenda, if you haven't had a chance, use this QR code, and we'd love to hear in 2 to 3 words what's bringing you to this conversation today. And from all of the amazing individuals we've heard from so far today, we know that there's so many threads, so many stories, so many connections that bring us to this conversation, and we'd love to just ground ourselves in that. So I'll give you a couple minutes, and then, we look forward to hearing from you. Okay, I think feel free to keep them coming, but everything I see so far is really beautiful. I think we'll point out a few themes. I'm seeing daughters. My daughter will choose. I think generally the idea of future, and I think that I was just having a conversation with someone about their kids or who they're thinking about when they're thinking about the current moment that we're in.
I love that someone put intersectionality. That really tees up this conversation for us. I think we're gonna have good conversations in the breakout rooms too.
Also super important to see Purvi Patel's case on here. That's one of the defining cases in the landscape of reproductive justice for South Asians. We won't be talking about it in detail today, but it really has set the tone for what mobilizing our community looks like. Oh, clicking the wrong button. So with that, I'll introduce you to our team here, South Asian SOAR. SOAR stands for Survivors, Organizations, and Allies Rising. Just to give you a little bit of context on why we exist. Across the US, there's about 40 organizations that specifically exist to serve South Asian survivors of gender-based violence or to address gender-based violence in South Asian communities. We're actually honored to be joined by leaders and founders and executive directors at some of these very organizations in the room today. If you want to just raise your hands to show people, they can come talk to you about that. And SOAR was founded, actually, call ourselves a pandemic baby. We were founded at kind of the height of the challenges that were being experienced by these organizations. And then just a year or 6 months or so into our journey, we started to see the leaked opinion come out and then the reversal of Roe. So much of our founding and the work that we do is informed by the intersection of reproductive justice and gender-based violence. I am also honored to introduce you to our incredible team. First, my name is Amrita. My pronouns are she, her. I currently lead SOAR. We are a national organization, a virtual organization, and so our team is spread out all across the US. This is the first time many of us are meeting. And with that, I'll hand it to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Michal Hamid. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm the Reproductive Justice Fellow at SOAR.
Hello, welcome. My name is Swetha Naroji, she, her. I am a OBGYN that actually focuses on the pediatric population. I'm a pediatric gynecologist, and one of my focuses is comprehensive sexual education.
Hi everyone, my name's Yasmine. I use they and she pronouns, and I'm the Digital Organizing Fellow at SOAR.
And Swetha is actually joining us as a special guest. We only got to meet her 2 weeks ago, but we've been nothing short of fangirling for a few weeks, and we're excited for all of you to learn from her today. With that, and this is something we share in all of our presentations, as I mentioned, you all come here with a different story and different connection to the variety of topics that we'll cover. And so what I really want to share with you is, if at any point you need to step back, step out, just be to yourself in this conversation, please feel free to do so. And we encourage that. And on the same note, like, bring whatever part of your story or yourself you can to this conversation. I think the whole point of today is literally building community and mobilizing the South Asian community in the movement for reproductive justice. To give you a bit of an overview of our time, we'll go over some key foundational concepts. I feel like there is a lot of language and definitions that we just want to level set on. Then we're excited to share what you may have seen some copies of in the back, SOAR's newest resource, our abortion care guide, which we'll be sharing a lot about throughout this presentation. And then we'll really get into the nitty-gritty of how does this impact our community, both the systemic barriers and the cultural barriers. And then we'll end with turning it to you, giving you an opportunity to have a conversation and start the dialogue, which is fundamental to organizing and mobilizing our communities. And so I'll just kick off with the first definition and then pass it to Yasmine. Gender-based violence. You may have heard the terms domestic violence, violence against women, interpersonal violence. There's kind of a whole set of vocabulary that is aimed at describing essentially this one thing, which is any type of abuse or harm that is rooted in exploitation. And I think I just want to make the distinction that in our work and in the work of the organizations in this room, historically we have spoken about women's rights or violence against women kind of exclusively, and we want to kind of just provide the note to broaden that conversation and recognize that everyone is facing an attack on their rights to bodily autonomy. Everyone faces forms of gender-based violence. And with that, I'll pass it to Yasmine to talk us through the intersection.
Yeah, for reproductive justice, I feel like this phrase gets tossed around a lot, right, in the movement, but we don't necessarily have the framework for it. So I learned it as a framework founded by like Sister Song, so a collective of Black women who founded this organization. I really think it's about like 3 main words, which are if, when, and how. So if, when, and how you'll have children, when you'll have them, how you'll parent them. But my biggest takeaway is really like, we want environments where you're safe, free from violence, not only that your community is free from violence, but that you personally as an individual, your body is free from violence, so bodily autonomy. And the reason why is because self-determination goes beyond the individual person, it's connected to the community. So that's why community care is self-care, and that's why we focus on systemic issues. And RJ is really one of 3 different frameworks that have to do with reproductive oppression. The other 2 you probably get, like you hear tossed around a lot with RJ, but not to be conflated. I feel like every movement is really based on 3 principles, which is service, advocacy, and organizing. So organizing is RJ, but service would be reproductive health, and reproductive rights would be advocacy. And those all are connected because reproductive oppression like really, I think, threatens all 3 aspects. So when we do movement building, we're not just focusing on one, we're focusing on all of them. So this conversation will hit all those topics. So we asked this question to ourselves as a GBV org, like what is our place in the movement? We're not necessarily RJ focused as our mission, but an attack on bodily autonomy is a form of violence, so that's why we became involved, and we ended up doing like an analysis of the landscape and what it looks like for our own community. So we know that these barriers that we face don't affect our population the same way. South Asians themselves, like there are so many subgroups, there's a whole diaspora. We're not just focusing on Indian Americans. And if we look at what those systemic barriers include, there are so many different things, right? Like a lot of us speak different languages, right? We go into medical spaces, we're judged by certain doctors. They might not be of the same culture as us. We might be a different gender, different sexuality, and we might express differently. And then also like limited access to multiple things. So for example, in this next slide is, thank you, is the difference in income between certain South Asian subgroups. I know this is not every subgroup within the diaspora, but you can see it's pretty staggering difference that Indian Americans make over $1 more compared to their white cis male counterparts. But if you look at every other subgroup that's listed here, it's significantly less. So we know that certain subgroups within our diaspora are more marginalized because of these inequalities. So when we have these conversations, we want to think about intersectionality and like what identities are in the room, and then also what identities you represent in the conversation. So this is one example. Survivors are also marginalized in this fight for reproductive justice. This statistic was staggering to me, that 39% of the participants that were surveyed who were South Asian women spoke about a lack of sexual and reproductive control that led to an unwanted pregnancy in the abusive relationship. So things like this are why we do this work. This number I know is an old number, but the statistics that we have now and the anecdotes that we have now from our partner organizations corroborate this number.
And as Yasmine was mentioning, basically when the leaked opinion, or actually I want to take you back to April 2022. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And we brought our collective of 32 organizations together and we asked, what are your challenges to talking about sexual assault with the survivors that you serve? And hands down, I think the number one thing is that, well, we can't talk about sexual assault if we can't talk about sex. And we can't talk about reproductive coercion if we can't talk about our bodies. And like everything just came back to what are these fundamental conversations that we can and can't have. And so when the leaked opinion came out in May and then Roe was reversed almost a year ago, we looked to research and we said, well, what can we find about how this is going to impact South Asian communities? And honestly, besides that one statistic that Yasmine just showed, basically nothing. There's stuff about the AAPI diaspora, there's stuff about immigrants, but really this intersection of how will this impact South Asians was not to be found. And so we set out to turn, where basically we turned to our member organizations, who are those 40 organizations across the US, and we said, how is this gonna impact the communities that you serve as the anchors of health, well-being, safety, and just education in your communities? And I remember a distinct conversation where one of the director of programs said, it's really hard for me to even talk about, again, what's happening in the legislative landscape because we can't talk about, I don't even know if we can talk about abortion yet, right? Like, we don't have the language for that. And so we compiled all of these findings into a community briefing, which we'll share a link to at the end. But really that last insight led to basically our next step, which was, let's just start with being able to open up the conversation, to being able to give language to what it is that we're experiencing and encountering with our bodies, but also legislatively. And so just last month, we released our abortion care guide by South Asians for South Asians. And again, just want to shout out, like Varuna in the front row here, our lead point of contact at Planned Parenthood, who is one of our partners on this, Kritika, Kavita, I think, in the room, just like individuals in this very space who spent time giving us feedback, informing what this should look like, and obviously the team here. What I think is the most exciting part is that this abortion care guide is available in 20 South Asian languages. There's 3 languages in the back, but all of them are online. Yeah, and this is a starting point for us, right? It's the beginning of so much more, but an incredible beginning. So with that, we want to really focus on education as a tool for empowerment today and then conversation. So I'm going to pass it to Dr. Naroji to lead us through the education portion.
Can everyone hear me? Yes, okay. So my name is Swetha Naroji. I am a pediatric gynecologist. And typically when I tell somebody that I'm a pediatric gynecologist, the first response is, wait, what is that? What exactly is this? And historically, we've always kind of ignored the fact that gynecological conditions can occur at much younger ages. We typically think that the uterus shows up when you're 18, and that's the only time you really need to pay attention to it. And then all of a sudden, if you're worried about sexual intercourse, that's the time that as our community, we need to talk and focus on it. And unfortunately, that is not the case. Reproductive justice actually starts the moment you are born. And a pediatric gynecologist is somebody who takes care of kids from the ages of actually from 0 until 24. And we focus on these concepts of reproductive justice. And so one of the things that we wanted to, or I wanted to bring up here today, one second, the other way, is that knowledge is powerful. Knowledge is incredibly powerful. And when we talk about mobilizing our community, there isn't one way, right? We need to approach this in a multimodal way, and one of them is knowledge. We do know that a lack of comprehensive sex education can lead to stigma. It can lead to a lack of well-being and reproductive health knowledge. But more importantly, when we think about mobilizing our community, we've actually shown that 30 years of comprehensive sexual education and teaching people about their bodies and their autonomy and learning how to have good and healthy relationships, whatever they may be, from younger and younger ages actually helps the society's well-being. It actually helps us to have higher levels of social and emotional learning. It increases our communication skills, and it also fosters the development of healthy relationships within that society. So when you think about sexual education, we should be thinking about it from a very, very young age. Now, I just said all of that, but let's talk about what actually is happening in our community, where we know that our community, or perhaps maybe our peers, feel very comfortable talking about things, or we feel like we have the knowledge and the understanding of the anatomy and all the processes behind it. But we also know that our community is not monolithic. We have multiple generations in our community, and that there is an information asymmetry between our generations. Previous generations have not been taught this. They did not have the opportunity to learn. It's not that they are unwilling, but they have not been taught this. And in our community specifically, teaching is typically top-down, right? Our elders teach us. About 2 days ago, I had a disagreement with my mom about whether or not I can store lentils in a plastic bag or glass. And this is about lentils. And her exact response was, okay, fine, Swetha, your mom is always wrong. And I think a lot of us have had that experience, right? To say, like, you're attempting to have a discussion about something, and then the response from the different generation tends to be a little bit dismissive, or that it feels like it's challenging when it truly is not meant to be challenging. I just wanted to store the lentils in the glass, like that was it. But yet that was kind of the response. And if I'm having that response when I'm talking about something as innocent as lentils, how am I going to attempt to try and bridge this information asymmetry? What words do we use? How do we do it? The one thing I will tell you about comprehensive sex education is that while the term says comprehensive, we don't have to aim for comprehension. We don't have to aim for the entirety. We aim for comprehension, I'm so sorry. But we don't aim for the entirety of it. Even if we just share one piece of information with a different generation, that is a step in the right direction. Other things that are important is, wow, I'm really not good at this clicker. Okay. Other things that are really important is language. Language is incredibly powerful. We all know in this room how language can shape our attitudes, our cultures, our beliefs. But unfortunately, when it comes to sexual education, medical terminology is confusing. There are some language reminders that we wanted to bring up today when we're talking specifically about sexuality and also within the lens of abortion care. So some language reminders. One, there are some top ones at the top that gendered language should not be used, and instead a person who is pregnant is more inclusive. Other things that are incredibly important when you're having these discussions with different generations or within the community, using terms like baby or fetus or unborn child is not helpful because it takes the attention and it does not center the person who is pregnant, the actual person who is seeking the care. And so we often use the word just terms of pregnancy. One tiny step of teaching different generations is if you hear someone telling a story about somebody who had an abortion and then they say something about the fetus, a quick correction could be, oh, no, they ended the pregnancy. That is a tiny, tiny thing that you can do that helps start to mobilize and educate a different generation. The other thing that's important is that a lot of times in medical literature and outside, abortions are referred to as elective or elective terminations, or that they made this choice to do it. And it again takes away the autonomy from the person who is seeking the care. So something that would be better to use is to make a decision. Unfortunately, medical terminology has not necessarily always kept up. We are slowly trying, but it hasn't always kept up with this. So we're going to cover quickly the fundamentals. I was told that I have about 6 or 7 hours to go through all of abortion care with you, and I will teach you everything that I know. Unfortunately, we only have a few minutes. So there were only 3 parts that I really wanted to focus on here. One is internal anatomy. It is difficult to have these conversations without understanding what anatomy we're talking about. I'm assuming at some point, and actually, you know what, that is an assumption, this is wrong. You may or may not have seen this image before. You may have seen it in schooling when you were younger, or maybe you did not see it, but I'm here to at least explain it to you. First part that I'd like to bring up is the part that's here, which is does this work? Oh, 1 second. Aha, look at that. Okay, the cervix, and that is connected to the uterus, which is here. Now, the uterus is typically where a pregnancy can reside. However, a pregnancy can also reside outside of the uterus. The other 2 things that I'd like to point out are the fallopian tubes. Those are typically where, when pregnancies don't reside in the uterus, they can sometimes reside in the fallopian tubes. They can also sometimes reside in the cervix, which is here. And the other organ system that I'd like to bring up is the ovaries. And so there are 2. One of the things about this picture is that this is typical anatomy, but a lot of people are actually born differently. Some people are born with 2 uteruses, some people are born with 1.5, some people are born with 2 cervixes, or people born without cervixes or vaginas. And understanding that there is variation within the human spectrum is another important key component when you're having these discussions with people. When we talk about the ovary, the only thing that I'd like you to take away from this is to say that this is where the egg comes from, and the release of the egg from the ovary is dependent on a wide variety of factors, but there are hormones in the body, and some of the hormones come from the brain. In terms of pregnancy fundamentals, again, what I'd like you to take away from this, because I only have a few minutes, is these are just the basic overviews of the importance of what we need to know about pregnancy. One, that in order to make an embryo, you need an egg and a sperm. The sperm can come from anywhere, the egg can come from anywhere, but if they meet and a few different things happen, then an embryo can be created. After the embryo is created, it implants in the uterus, or it can implant somewhere else. And then when you think about what's currently being legislated in our country today, a lot of discussion about abortion comes from timing and abortion bans and weeks. And it's important to bring up the fact that from the moment that an egg and sperm meet to when, I am real bad at this. I'm attempting to print. Well, thank you. Okay, so from the moment the egg and sperm meet to when we might know, not we definitely, but we might know that somebody is pregnant is about 2 weeks, because the embryo doesn't start releasing the hormone we can test for 2 weeks. The other thing that we look for is, how do I know it's in the uterus? I won't know that for about 6 or 8 weeks after that. And so that's also a might, that's a possibility. It makes when legislators and when advocates focus on timing of abortion ban, I hope that this kind of illustrates the fact that we don't actually have the ability to always know at the times that they have decided that we should know. Medicine has not gotten there yet. The next, you know what? I'm going to. So I'm so bad at this clicker. I'm just going to do it myself. No? No, no. Oh, no. Oh, this thing? You guys are so good. Okay, all right, so I'm just gonna stand right here and it'll be focus on me. The next slide was gonna be abortion fundamentals to kind of talk about what is an abortion. So an abortion is the process of becoming unpregnant. That's it. That is what it is. And the reason why it's important to use that definition is because there are lots of different ways that somebody can become unpregnant. And medical terminology has made this hard. People will refer to miscarriages. In medicine, we call that a spontaneous abortion. People will refer to, oh, the pregnancy might have been intended, but the pregnancy itself could not be continued. Those are things called either inevitable abortions or missed abortions. The lack of clarity from the medical community has made it hard for us to mobilize other people around it because unfortunately, the term abortion always has gotten polarized. And so it's hard to have these discussions when we have not clarified it for everyone. One point of advocacy and one point of mobilization from the South Asian community could be to clarify some of these things within our community, to understand that abortion care is not limited to elective terminations, but is actually a wide variety of possible healthcare options. Okay, well, I can actually now get back to this. So why is this confusing? So not only are there multiple overlapping definitions for abortions, but there are also multiple overlapping options for abortion care. Again, because we have limited time, I decided to focus primarily on medication abortion. So there are two types of abortions out that we have. And the big umbrella terms for them is either pills or a procedure. So the pills are the ones that I'm going to focus on today. But pills are two medications that you take that allow for the ending of a pregnancy, for someone to become not pregnant anymore. The procedure option is actually also varied. It can happen in a clinic, it can happen in a hospital, it can happen in an office. There are multiple different ways for this to happen, and unfortunately also has multiple different names. You might have heard the terms D&C, you might have heard the terms D&E, you might have heard surgical abortion or an MVA. It makes it very difficult and a little bit confusing. We can talk quickly about the pill version because that is something that has increased in the last 30 years. And when I say that's increased in the last 30 years, we have found that not only is it safe, but we are able to do it at 4 different people and 4 different gestational ages. It's 2 medications, mifepristone and misoprostol. And those are sometimes referred to as the abortion pill, but it's actually 2 separate medications that get used. The first one is a medication that blocks a hormone that typically comes from the ovary, progesterone. And misoprostol is a medication that's used to help kind of relax the uterus and expel anything that's inside the uterus. Both of these can either be taken either in office or with a provider, or it can actually be taken at home. And so when we think about how abortions are performed in the South Asian community, we actually have, again, a wide range of options. Another small point of how to help mobilize and teach different generations is if somebody is talking to you about an abortion, either somebody else's or theirs, even just having the ability to have a conversation that says, oh, what type? Or how did this happen? Or, oh, I know a little bit about that, allows for communication, and it helps destigmatize this process. The last part that I really wanted to mention is that emergency contraception, so the morning after pill, and mifepristone and misoprostol are 2 separate things. So often, everyone's nodding in the room, or a lot of people are nodding in the room, and that is giving me such hope, and so, it's making me so happy, because So often that is not the case. A lot of people think of them as the same thing. These are different medications, and unfortunately, they are not always, they're oftentimes conflated with one another, which is very unfortunate. Another option for mobilizing our community, or if you feel like there needs to be an action item for this, providing emergency contraception, or at least pointing out, oh, the emergency contraception when you see it in the drugstore, is a quick and fast way to help starting to have these conversations. These are things that can be stored at home. They are shelf stable. You don't need it at the exact time, but when you need it, you have it. And it is something that you can keep in your home for a really, really long time. Let's see. Okay. Before I end my part, and my part in the discussion of abortion care and how comprehensive sexuality education is incredibly important for mobilizing our community, I did want to bring up the fact that feelings after abortion, and this is directly from the Abortion Care Guide, is it can be varied. And one way to support our community members who are either seeking abortion care, who have had abortions in the past, or are considering it or even discussing it, is to help introduce the topic and help introduce the idea that all of the feelings that one can have after seeking healthcare are valid. Every single one of them. It can be sad, it can be relief, it can be regret, but each one of those is normal, and that it is incredibly important that we have these conversations and then we talk about it. And we explain to those around us of multiple different generations that these are normal conversations to have. With that, I'm going to hand it off. Thanks for being with me while we had some AV difficulties, but I'm going to hand it off to Sarah.
So we had a little bit of tech difficulties, right? But let's just take a deep breath. We're learning so much. There's so much new information. My name is Michal Hamid. Like I said, I use she and they pronouns. I am a very proud Punjabi, Kashmiri, and Ashkenazi abortion doula. And that means, yes, abortion doulas rock. And that means that I support people as they become unpregnant. And I support people as an abortion doula, specifically South Asians like myself, because I am part of the millions of South Asians who have had an abortion. And I'm very proud of that. A self-managed abortion is when a person decides to manage their own abortion outside of the medical system. And we are a people who thrive when we have the right to bodily autonomy, because we are a people who have known very intimately and physically the long-lasting and deeply painful consequences when we cannot control the decisions and things that happen to our bodies and the bodies of our ancestors. We are a people who have known systemic intergenerational trauma, and the ability to make decisions about what happens to our bodies corrects the narrative that we get to decide what happens to us. Not our families, not the state, not our aunties, not our mother, not our cousins, not an ideal of marriage, but our own selves. Self-managed abortion is not illegal in the United States. Self-managing an abortion is not illegal. Purchasing abortion pills is not illegal. However, over 25 states have criminally investigated and or arrested people for allegedly ending their own pregnancy or helping someone else to. One of the best known cases is that of Purvi Patel, who was criminalized for managing her own pregnancy outcome that did not happen in the way that the state perceived was fit, which highlights the impact of criminalization in our communities, which is why abortion is so important for us. But abortion is also a safe and common procedure and can be safely managed without a medical provider. They are common. They were once the primary mode of abortion in South Asia prior to British colonization. And it is something that can be incredibly dignifying and liberatory for our communities. Dr. Swetha mentioned having Plan B. Having abortion pills in your backup medicine cabinet is something that can and should be normalized in South Asian households.
You can go to the next slide. And with all of this conversation about South Asian households, South Asian communities, just kind of what the conversation has looked like, we want to shift this final last part to really bringing it home and thinking about our communities, whether that's your family or your friends, chosen family as well. And so we're going to watch a short video and just keep in mind the question that was on the previous slide, which is, what are the cultural norms or stigmas around abortion and reproductive health care in the conversations that you have had, or maybe that have held you back from having one of those conversations? This is Shreya Sarkar, who has... Go for it.
Story is not what you think it is, because it's really boring. This happened back in 2014. I was in grad school, and it was the week of finals. I was late for my period, and I was feeling nauseous. So I went to Planned Parenthood, where the tests are free. The test came back, and they're like, well, you're pregnant. So I ended up celebrating my first anniversary with my first boyfriend by getting my first abortion. I took my homework with me, and my partner took the day off to come. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to go into the actual waiting room with me, so he went and saw John Wick instead, which is now our abortion movie. I've since done a fair amount of stand-up about my abortion. I've told hundreds of strangers, but have yet to tell my parents. It's unsurprisingly, a very taboo topic in my culture. My parents are my best friends. They mean everything to me. And one of the reasons I chose to have an abortion is because I could not support or encourage or even love a child at that point in my life the way my parents did for me. So if anything, it's their fault that I had to get an abortion. I'm really grateful for that boring as hell abortion that I got. I was able to actually focus on the things that I wanted to focus on. So long story short, my abortion is one of the best things that's ever happened to me.
And just like that, I think we witnessed the power of storytelling. And this is one of a constellation of stories that tells us of what abortion narratives can look like in our community. So we won't have time to share. Feel free to keep reflecting on this on this question. And if we have time, we'll invite you into conversation about it.
Is right after this, so at lunch, maybe you all can congregate and have these conversations together. But to quickly go over our community's attitudes, I don't know if I hear a collective gasp yet, but this shocked me. These numbers shocked me. We overwhelmingly support abortion care, abortion access, to the point where it's like, why don't we have these conversations, right? If everyone's for it, or almost everyone and their moms are for it, why aren't we talking about it? Especially the 82% number, 20% of Jane medical professionals too. We know folks who have an abortion, and you probably do too, even if it's not discussed. And that's because we know that supporting it is not the same thing as destigmatizing it. It's still a taboo topic in our community, but these conversations need to happen together in order to tie that access and voting rights to the ability to actually speak about it, educate our youth about it, and have intergenerational conversations. And there was a study done by NAPOF and IBIS Reproductive Health that I actually helped with. I ran some focus groups for that looked at the barriers to abortion care, and participants overwhelmingly identified religious beliefs, even though we just saw a slide on how people of all religions, it spans across, support abortion access and abortion care, along with familial ties, responsibilities, and personal beliefs as well. And this is a quote from a participant who was in the Bangla focus group. Overwhelmingly, all the participants in the non-English speaking focus groups agreed that they have very little or limited knowledge to medication abortion or to just abortion care in general. And that makes sense, right? That's the cross of the cultural barrier that we're facing, and also language barriers, language justice that are not in our systems. Here's another quote that I really liked. This is from an English focus group. And I actually remember this participant talking about it. Everyone in the room resonated. They felt really isolated, and they knew that they wanted and had to seek abortion care. They made that decision already. But the hard part was the journey of not having someone with you, not being able to tell your family, just like the abortion story that we just heard. And that's what makes it tricky, right? So that's why we want to be in community with each other and support one another.
And I think for me, the last few slides, we were talking about this at a recent abortion care guide launch, actually, that it's not just about the moment of abortion, which I feel like we focus on a lot, right? There is a long-term journey after that to continuing to process and going through sharing with folks before and after. And I think that feeling of isolation, that feeling of shame, any of these things, they stay with us. And so destigmatizing isn't just to increase access or make it okay to have an abortion, but it's about really being able to find joy and just kind of freedom and liberation in the decisions that we make. And so it's a long-term haul towards destigmatizing and opening up these conversations. I know there's terms on here, but really our main point is that actually starting these conversations is such an important tool that we leverage in our communities already. And I think sometimes, even when we think about mobilizing, right, we maybe think about the Women's March or other protests. And I think I've spoken to South Asians and being like, maybe that doesn't feel like the space that we want to be in. Maybe we want to dance or sing or draw or just talk and feed each other food. And that's where we nurture each other and nurture these conversations. And so we bring to you this tool of relational organizing, which is really super simple, but it's about using your relationships and the ability to talk with one another about the things that matter. It's about using your stories, using the education that Swetha and Sarah shared with us today, and using your tools of connecting with one another to be able to open up these conversations, destigmatize topics, and eventually that will shift policy, it'll shift culture, it'll shift legislation, it'll shift services that our communities can provide, it'll shift resources to the organizations and people that provide them. And that's the most important change that we can make. And I think we leave you with this. I don't know if we have time for breakout rooms. No, okay. It's a quote that we really center in our work, which is from feminist writer and organizer Gloria Anzaldúa. Nothing happens in the real world unless it first happens in the images in our head. And yeah, I'll let that sink in. I think even within our team, conversations, or within our membership, these conversations are the first place where we can actually conjure up these images with one another, right? We can build a new reality together. So I think maybe the takeaway is not to keep it in your head, but actually share it with someone else. Start building that vision together, and that's how we'll work towards creating it. We did have some questions for you, but they are in the toolkit that we're going to share after because we want to respect your time and let you move to the next session. But before we go, there is merch. Also, you can find it in our toolkit. Here's an example. I think Sarah's about to pull out a sweatshirt. Yep. The merch is also a great way to just share your pride in this, right? There's also sliding scale discount codes. You don't need to buy it. You can let us know, and we would be happy to give it to you. But with that, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being in this conversation. Oh, we have 10 minutes. Okay, so maybe we'll do some breakout groups. Sorry, rewind. Great. So I think let's just turn to the 2 to 3 people next to you. Share any reflections, but here are some questions to help guide your conversation, and then we'd love to have a few people share back with us. So maybe let's just take 7 minutes to chat within your groups.
Hey, everyone. It sounds like there's been really, really, really great, lively conversations happening. And now we're going to have the opportunity to share some of these conversations together. Are there 1 to 2 groups that would like to share some of the conversations and things that they discussed? Sarah will be giving the mic out. Is there anybody that feels compelled to share back? I see one hand, yeah, right there. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, hi. So we had 2, I think, major points that we wanted to talk about because we were talking about how this conversation happens in the motherland versus here, and how we talk about it or don't talk about it in our cultures. But Sapna made a very interesting point that, the conversation has shifted from abortion and terminating pregnancy, especially in the motherland, to being just a thing that happens that we don't really talk about. Why is it such a big thing? Why is it such a big political thing in the US that people care about? To now we're begging to talk about it because we can barely do it. Or it's getting harder to do it. And the other point that we were talking about was how when you terminate a pregnancy or you have whatever, the spontaneous abortion or an inevitable abortion or a stillbirth, we don't have the same community grieving process that we do when someone dies. We don't have, Hindus have every month for the first year, every year until whoever's doing the grieving is then dead and cannot do the ceremonies. Christians, when they have a stillbirth, they have a baptism. But there's no community grieving around someone who terminated their pregnancy or had a miscarriage and has to deal with that kind of alone. And it's really sad that we don't have the same cultural practices that we do for everybody else for this community who needs it. Probably even more so.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I felt really, really alone when I had my abortion. I didn't tell my parents, I couldn't tell my family members, and it was through learning about the culture of care that South Asians have preserved in little pockets throughout our history, specifically when it comes to abortion care, that made me realize that our stories and euphemisms and riddles and jokes carry so much information about abortion care. There's a number of euphemisms like going to Kashi, the wife's help. There is abortion care embedded in our communities, but we get to be vocal about it and we get to be unapologetic about it now, which is very special. And I look forward to those conversations continuing. Yeah. Is there someone else that would feel compelled to share about? I see some smiles like, oh, there's maybe some juiciness over there. We'd love to hear.
Yeah, thank you. So our group actually, we had a lot of time to discuss how we grew up and what abortion access and conversation looked like when we were younger. And it was pretty quick to say that we didn't have any conversation or any acknowledgement of all the resources and the care that was in place for situations like this. And one thing that we kind of came together and realized were the generation before us sometimes would brush things under the rug or would feel like awkward having these conversations. We had some anecdotes about medical professionals who just didn't create a safe and open environment for us. There's also the idea of by going to get medical care, by going to get or educate yourself on abortion access, that you're acknowledging a whole other plethora of things like sexual activity, like rape, so many things that are already stigmatized in our community, and it prevented us from feeling like we had an outlet to go to until after those things happened, until after there was like a negative connotation, a negative situation, and then we realized that there were resources and outlets to help us all along. So we had a really interesting conversation and learned a lot. So,
Well, thank you all so much. I mean, one thing that I think can really ground us all is that we know our ancestors practiced abortion, and we will continue to do that because it keeps us safe. And we, like I said earlier, are people who have known what's at stake when we don't have the right to bodily autonomy. And many of that has been shown through our intergenerational trauma and inability to speak about what happens to our bodies. It's almost like our bodies are a reflection of our families so often, and our bodies are ours, no one else's. So, thank you.
All right. Well, can we give one more round of applause to all of our amazing presenters?